workshop for you to, study for your exams or whatsoever, so don't expect that. I'll try to not give so much those excruciating details, but rather logics and how can you use them in debates. But before I start, who here studies economics? Alright, cool. Who have interests in economics, even though they don't study? Perfect. Obviously you have interest because you're here. Alright, perfect. So what I'm going to do is, let me tell you to give the... Okay, the topics I will be covering, basically, is the information asymmetry, moral hazard, game theory, Keynesian economics, and free trade versus protectionism. Notice, all these topics, I could talk about them for individually, for an hour or whatsoever. So this will be, since this workshop is aimed at 40 minutes or 60 minutes, we will try to cover them, but we won't obviously go into a very detail of this. It will be just, again, for something that you will need in order to win the debating tournaments or debating options whatsoever. So, let's start with this. Information asymmetry and adverse selection. What do I mean by that? So, did anyone hear about this lemons and peaches and something like that about the car market, that example? Yes, I have one person who already heard about it, 2 people, because you studied it, 3 people. Okay, so maybe it will be a little bit boring for you, but this is an important concept. So what does it mean? So if you go to, for example, second-hand car market, there will be some cars that are really in good condition. And they're called peaches, because peaches are tasty. I think that's the reason. And then there will be some cars that are not so good, that for example, the engine is not working perfectly, or there are some scratches, so it's not in a good shape. And they will be called lemons, because lemons are sour. And you're surprised always when you eat the lemon, right? So I think that's the idea. So when you go to these markets, you will generally see 2 types of cars. And what we see in this, for example, market, for the sake of example, the peaches will be sold for $1,000 and the lemons will be sold for $500. Alright? That's their prices. If you go as a consumer, as a buyer of these cars, go to that market, if you don't know which car is peach and which car is a lemon, you probably you're willing to spend $750 because you are willing to accept the risk that your car could be a peach or your car could be a lemon. So you would pay something in the middle, right? However, if you go to a market and offer $750, no seller would sell you the peach. Because they already know if it's a peach car, if it's a good car. They would never sell you for $750 because they are basically losing $250, right? They would want to sell it for higher. So the only car they will sell it to you would be the lemons. Because there they make a profit. Right? That's the first step. That's the adverse selection, basically. But let's look at the next step. If you know this as a consumer, as a buyer, that if you offer $750, you will end up with a lemon, then you only offer $500, right? You wouldn't even offer that much because you know how the buyers will react to you. Hence, you would only offer $500. In that sense, only the cars that are lemons will be sold in the market. And the peaches will stay in the garage. No one will try to buy them because you are never sure if you are getting a peach. And that it won't be sold. And that's the problem of information asymmetry. The markets fail because there is no way of assessing and accessing that information in terms of customers. Then you have a problem, right? What do you have to do? You have to intervene, right? The government, for example, or some other people have to intervene, regulate the market, and make sure that everyone sells properly. So that's basically the idea of it. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yes? So you have to always think about step by step. So if I do this, how the others will react, and then how the others will react based on that. So that's basically the idea. But how do we apply this to debating? For example, in job applications, there was a law that passed in the United States that the employers were looking at the credit scores of the candidates. And when they're looking at the credit scores, they are trying to eliminate candidates who are coming from poor backgrounds or who have debt, basically. And when the government banned employers to actually ask that credit score, what happened? Employers themselves started to estimate without asking who might have a poor credit score. And what they did is they immediately, for example, eliminated people whom they think could have those bad scores. And they, for example, eliminated African Americans from the job application process because they expected them to have low credit scores. So that created even much more discrimination because people who belong to that group but have higher scores couldn't actually signal and show themselves, right? They couldn't differentiate themselves. And because of that, all employers, in order to avoid the risk, they basically didn't employ anyone from the group they deemed to have lower credit scores. So that's the idea. Does it make sense? All right. And the second thing is maybe even much more straightforward or much more, how can I say, more common sense. So normally we don't ask women if they want to be pregnant or not. Generally, in many countries in Europe, it's illegal. So you can't ask women in the job interviews if they're planning to be pregnant or whatsoever because it's discriminatory. But when you have that kind of policy, sometimes many employers don't even hire women in the first place because they assume they're going to get pregnant eventually. So it's impossible for women who themselves don't want to have children at all, or maybe they're planning 20 years later, or they just want to adopt, they are not going to leave the job. For those women, it's impossible for themselves to differentiate compared to the other candidates, right? So that's another problem of adverse selection. So you might say that, for example, this house would ban asking, pregnancy women in job interviews or whatsoever, a motion like that, similar to that, or reverse. If you have that, you can use this argument, how it's actually beneficial to be able to ask this question and get answers from the candidates because they get to differentiate themselves. Obviously, it's very important here. Obviously, it's very important here that you explain why they would have this expectation. Because of the societal reasons, because of the stereotypes whatsoever. So when you have those kind of stereotypes, when you have those kind of expectations, it's more likely that the people discriminate against certain groups. Here there will be an information asymmetry, right? And for those kind of things, it's very important that people can go against that. All right. And also insurance. That's another point we can use. So in insurance, who are more likely to get insurance? People who think they're at the risk of getting sick, dying, something like that. You want to have insurance because you know that you are much more likely to suffer from conditions, right? And insurer givers, they also know that, right? That you are much more likely to ask for insurance. Hence, they are already aware that you are much more likely to be costly because you are going to demand more money from them. So in order to break that problem, what do insurance providers do? They create, for example, groups. They say, okay, if you're a smoker, if you're, let's say, above a certain age and have a history of heart conditions whatsoever, or in your family there are those things that you have to pay a higher premium compared to people who are young, who are healthy, who are doing sports whatsoever. So you create a market segment in order to prevent the problems in the market. So that's another example why insurance providers can ask certain kind of detailed questions so they can, in result, create a system where they can put people in brackets. And maybe this is more discriminatory. For some people, they have to pay more, right? Because if you are, for example, a smoker, maybe you have to pay more. So this might be considered as discrimination. But if there was no option for them to ask this, then they would have discriminated based on much more arbitrary criteria, and it would create much bigger discrimination. So you could easily claim that, okay? Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Do you think, is there any other ideas that we can use this, information asymmetry or something like that? Any thoughts, any discussions? No, don't fear. There's no wrong answer.
Basically, I think that any situation where you need to like debate more information should be considering this.
Yes.
But I think that I mean like this is the main main cases we're debating right now.
Yes.
Example would be not letting people under the age of 18 vote because you think that they do not have access to information. Because they're not as politicized, you then take the action of not letting them vote. And therefore, when they do get to that age, they are less likely to be involved in politics. I think if you have a debate on that type of topic, this is where this would apply.
Yeah, definitely. Fair enough. Any other thoughts?
Can this apply to age restrictions in like election candidates, for example? I mean,
Presumably.
we presume that they do not have and possess enough of the experience and information to rule, and therefore we kind of make our pool smaller.
Yeah. Yeah, you could claim that, definitely. Very good. Then we can move to our second point, which is moral hazard. I put a little small joke there, so enjoy the joke first. So that basically explains the idea, saying spill all you want, it's a rented tuxedo, but I got the insurance. So that's basically moral hazard. Moral hazard in economics is the idea that when you have when you have a protection and when others are gonna pay for your mistakes, then you have a moral hazard. So that's basically the idea. For example, this easiest example would be probably insurance, right? If your car is insured, if you rented a car, make sure it's insured, because why? You never know what will happen, right? That's the idea. But once you have the full insurance, you're probably a little bit more reckless while driving. You're probably making, going back, going right, making much more movements, rights and lefts. That's basically the idea. If you didn't have the insurance, that means if you scratch the car a little bit, that would cost you the most, right? Like you had to pay a lot. But if you have the insurance, you're not going to pay it, hence it creates a little bit reckless behavior. Another great example, maybe it's even much more applicable, is the banks. If you think about the 2008 mortgage crisis, subprime mortgage crisis, what happened was that banks, or these financial institutions, they knew that they are very important for the economy. They knew that the government will bail them out no matter what. Because if they failed, whole economy would trickle down in like a domino stones, and it would impact everything, right? Many people would lose jobs, many institutions would fail, etc., etc. Because of that, they were even taking more risks. So they were selling certain they were making certain financial transactions that they shouldn't even be making in the first place. But they had that trust because they knew that there was a safety net under them. So that's another example why moral hazard could lead to certain kind of problems. Yes? All right. And then, how can we think about this in debate? In the sense that, I know this is a very broad question. Think about this United States politics, domestic politics, and think about the Republicans and the Democrats. One of the major issues they discuss and they never agree on is this universal health insurance. Is that right? Or generally safety nets, basically giving unemployment benefits or any other kind of benefits. Why do they disagree on that so much? Is that one reason is that one party, like the Republicans, much more rely on the idea that moral hazard. They think if they provide everything regardless of their people's condition, then this would create a moral hazard that people wouldn't work, wouldn't study, wouldn't do things they need to do, but rather just enjoy their money and sit on the couch. So that's another way of looking at American politics. Like some people do really believe in the moral hazard. And if you look at the statistics, yes, some people will actually take the benefits and not work. But in reality, obviously, we need to discuss if these people will be the majority or minority, and if they're a minority, can we excuse that behavior? And I think Democrats and Republicans generally differentiate from that perspective, right?
Right.
Is that a comment? Oh, no. Ah, you're agreeing. Okay, perfect. All right. What else? We can look at, for example, again, in terms of moral hazard. So when you know you have an insurance in terms of hospitals, it's like you know that you're going to be secure, that your hospital payments will be paid no matter what, then you're much more likely to take also risks in terms of, going outside maybe with a thin cloth rather than, making sure that you're protected, or making much more risky activities, running in sweat and not caring about your own health whatsoever. So that's another idea, that when you have the full care in the hospitals or in this insurance, then you're also not necessarily caring about your own health. But what you can say, as opposed to, is that in certain instances, this is not very realistic. Like, I'm not gonna risk my own health just because the hospital costs are taken care of, right? I still have to suffer through the sickness. There's still a damage on me, there's still a cost on me. So there is enough incentive for me to avoid that. So here, in terms of moral hazard question, or in the debate, important thing is one side should try to show that there are enough incentives for the people to avoid the cost themselves and hence not follow that moral hazard behavior, right? So if I know that I'm going to suffer, if I reckless drive, then I'm going to go into a crash and then I can lose a limb, right? So that's enough incentive maybe for me to not to drive that recklessly. So you could always argue that, you could always come back to that idea and defend it. Just because one side says, oh, there is moral hazard because, oh, there's safety, doesn't automatically win the debate or doesn't automatically win the argument, because they also have to show you there are not enough incentives for people to protect themselves. Okay? Okay. Any questions so far? So far so good? Okay. Next topic. Game theory. Let's play game. Alright. Probably a lot of, if you watch the pop culture, or if you're into pop culture, maybe you watch the movie of this Beautiful Mind, and where they discuss Nash equilibrium and whatsoever. But even if you don't know it, no problem. I'm going to just briefly explain what it is. So game theory and the prisoner dilemma, it's one sub-point of game theory. And it's the most interesting one in my opinion, because it's very interesting to see how people behave when they expect other people to behave in a certain way. What do I mean? I mean this. So let's imagine there are two prisoners who were captured by the police, and they were put into two different rooms. There are two different rooms, so they cannot communicate with each other. And there is an investigator going there and asking them questions, like try to make them confess or whatever, like classic, American movie scenario. So, here's the catch. If they both confess, they both go to jail for 10 years. And if they both keep quiet, they just go to jail for 1 year. But if one of them confesses and one of them keeps quiet, the person who keeps quiet gets a life in jail, life in prison, life sentence. And the other one who told, who confessed, who snitched, goes free. Okay? So those are the things, those are the presumptions. And what happens here? So prisoner A says, okay, if my friend confesses, if I confess, then I will go to jail for 10 years. If I keep quiet, then I will go to jail for the rest of my life. So for me, what makes sense in this situation, assuming my friend is going to confess, is to confess. Okay? Because you compare this and you take the better one. And then you go to the second. You say, okay, but what if my friend keeps quiet? Then what should I do? Let's look. If my friend keeps quiet and if I confess, then my friend goes to jail forever, for the rest of their life, and I go free. And if he keeps quiet and I confess, if I keep quiet, then we both go to jail for 1 year. So if you compare those two, again, you go free here, and you go to jail for 1 year here, so that's obviously better. So in both situations, you choose to confess, because in both situations it's better for you. Okay? But the thing is, your friend also makes this calculation, right? And in the end, even though you both do something that's best for you, as a group, you end up in jail for 10 years. So as a group, you actually don't make the most optimum choice. Why is that? Because you can't communicate. If you were to communicate, and if you were to trust each other, then you would make sure you both keep quiet. But when you cannot communicate, you end up here. So that's the idea of this prisoner's dilemma. And we can also we can apply this to other areas of life. Does anyone have any idea or an example where we can apply this in debate context or in life?
Yes.
Yes.
Example, when you go to shop and make some choice with you, to moment. It's a bad example. I think when we choose a wife, for example, you have, I think maybe you know about Nobel Prize 2012. It was about the Fury and some market, imaginable market with wives, and I think that it was something like theorem about nations in Game Theory, so, and it's very, I think, important work. I didn't remember this guys, this economist. So, and if you maybe can contact with your wife, if you're man, you can choose the best preference for you. But if you don't have some contact with your preference, so you can maybe choose the worst preference for you. So this example of I think communication and importance of communication.
Yes. For example, think about the companies. Normally, they set their prices based on supply and demand, based on many considerations in the market, right? But they are not allowed to set prices with their competitors, right? Because if they were to set these prices, then they would set a higher price and they would all agree they are never going to decrease that price. So think about, for example, a detergent brand. They all agree that we are going to sell it for $5. And then, if no one is going to decrease their price, then as a consumer, we all end up paying $5. But since it's illegal in the status quo, normally, to set prices, to agree on the prices, they have to compete. And they have to compete on the level of product quality, but on the level of price as well. Because sometimes we have certain companies who give a lower price, and some consumers do prefer that, right? So that's basically also a little bit about game theory. That you set a price in a way that is not necessarily best, it's best for you, but it's not best for everyone. It's not best for the companies, all the companies involved, because you also have to compete for the price. Okay? So that's, I think, very important to show here, that even though you're making the best choice for yourself, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best choice for everyone. Another example we can think of, imagine you're living in this village and you have this beautiful lake, and this beautiful lake have really nice fish, really tasty fish. And as a fisherman who belong to this village, you have an incentive to get as much as fish as possible. Because if you do that, you're going to get more money, you're going to eat more, you can sell to other villages, whatsoever. But other fishermen have the same motivation and incentive too. And if you all do that, and if there is no limit, there won't be any fish left in the lake, right? So that's basically the idea. Even though you're making the best choice for yourself, best decision for yourself, as a group, it's not necessarily mean it's the best choice. So you can think about this now. Let's apply to this more global scale. Think about the companies who are trying to minimize their cost and maximize their profit. What do? They are giving the lowest wages possible to the workers. They are sometimes, for example, polluting the environment, right? They're making the best choice for themselves in order to maximize their profits, but when every company does that, because they need to compete, then there's a problem because they all create a very big pollution, the wages are not increasing that much, and etc. etc. You can find other problems as well. What else? In developing world, for example, when you have a motion, this house would not buy products from developing countries who use child labor or who use labor in a bad way or something, who don't pay high wages or whatsoever. When you have a motion like that.
Well, everybody does that, and therefore we have worse situation with child labor.
Exactly. So the thing is, if there is no deterrence, if there is no stop in the market, everyone will continue doing that. So that's basically the idea, to show that in order to stop this, you need to make sure that you create a deterrence effect. So if Western countries or Western populations didn't buy from those developing countries, for example, then because they are using child labor, then this would create an incentive for them to compete over other companies who are working in the developing world, right? And then this would create an incentive for them to change their policies. And they are less likely to hire child labor because they want to sell more and make profit more. So that's basically the idea. Okay? All right. Keynesian economics. So what is Keynesian economics? So Keynes is a guy who worked in the area of economics, who had some really interesting ideas. And these ideas were valid for a very long time, but nowadays we don't think them as that valid anymore. What do I mean by this? So Keynes' policies and economics came into our attention when there was a big crisis in the world. So when there was a crisis in the United States that started in New York, the Big Depression, the governments were basically keeping their budgets tight and they were not making any spendings. So they were trying to cut their spendings in order to avoid the depression further, in order to avoid the recession. But what Keynes suggested, we shouldn't actually stop spending money, but rather we should continue spending money so that this could create more impacts in the society. How? So Keynes suggested if the government uses its revenues to create, for example, a shop or a little tiny shop or a hospital or a school or whatsoever, even that could actually create something positive in the market. Why? Because once government makes that building, you need to hire, for example, workers who is gonna build that building. You need to, for example, buy certain supplies from other companies, you know? So you make other people earn money by creating a job in the market. Which means that as a worker, I didn't have a job before, but now I'm building a school for the government. That means I have a wage. That means I can go home and buy more bread, a TV, chocolate or whatsoever, and then TV seller has now more money because someone else bought one more TV, and like this, you know? So this is called the multiplier effect. You create one spending in the one part of the market, and then this trickles down to other areas of the market because people get employed, and generally people have a tendency to spend their money on things they would like to have once they have more money. So that was the idea. But what's the problem with this idea?
Well, not necessarily everybody's going to spend their money with this.
That's
one of the
yes.
purposes. It's not the main purpose.
You create debt, and then on the long run you have to raise taxes, which is...
Yes. So where does the government money come from? It doesn't come from there. It doesn't grow on the field. It comes from people's taxes. And in order for you to be able to make spending, you need to use those tax money. So that means you need to use people's money that they would have normally spent on themselves or put it into banks and invest, and you take that money and put it somewhere else. So first of all, you can say this is actually creating less spending because people that would have spent that money, if they didn't give it as taxes to government, they would have spent themselves, right? So that's one thing. And second thing is, you can claim this is not necessarily efficient. Because you can ask, do governments always know where to spend and how to spend? Not necessarily, right? individuals, if they have their own profit maximization and incentive maximization, then they would have made probably better choices. Like think about all the projects in the world that failed because governments thought it was a good idea. They built so many big buildings, they made so many roads, they made so many bridges, and a lot of them are not necessarily efficient. Like you have, for example, in Bulgaria, you have this huge 25-story building that is still in construction because it started in the communist area and it never finished. And imagine all that money was wasted there. And imagine all the other kind of expenditures that was made by the state and that didn't help anyone. So that's basically the idea, all right? But what else can we say about this? So if I didn't give my money to state as a tax, and if I didn't spend, where else I would have put that money?
Under my bed.
No, but would I put it under my bed? Because I'm losing my money if I put it under my bed because of the inflation, right? If you keep your $100 right now, in 5 years you can actually buy less things with that $100 because there's inflation. Your money is actually eating itself.
Unless you're in Japan.
Maybe. Yes, but in generally you have incentives to invest, right? You have incentive to put that money to bank, so you can at least earn some interest, so that your money doesn't get less. So normally you would have done that. If you didn't give your money to state as a tax, you would have kept it, put it in a bank, get interest, and if you put it in a bank, some other entrepreneurs could have taken that money, as a loan from the bank, and make an investment themselves. So open up a factory themselves, right? And they would have a profit incentive, so they would have a really good business case. They would have made sure, okay, my costs are good, my profits are good, I'm going to employ the best people, I'm going to make sure that they work very well, not like government, something like that. You could claim that. So what you can say is, if you keep your money yourself and put it in a bank, you actually create much more investment. And if the governments take the money and spend it as a tax and try to invest somewhere, it actually crowds out the private investment. You are investing in a market where private actors have now less incentives or less ability to invest because now there is less money in the bank. If there is less money in the bank, that means every loan I'm getting from the bank is more expensive, right? But if there is more money in the bank, it will be cheaper for me to get that money as a loan. Does it make sense? Yeah? You follow? I don't want to bore anyone with the interest rates and inflation and exchange rate whatsoever, but that's basically the idea. So you can always claim if there is more of something in the hands of government, it's not necessarily something good, and you can claim it's better to create it in the private hands. Alright, so before I move on, I just want to explain why I have this cartoon here. It's not because I love that child who's doing something, it's more like the Canis, the idea could be also represented as something like this. So even if you have no opportunity to create a job, even if you don't have any opportunity to build a school and get people work there whatsoever, just give people money who should dig holes and then fill those holes back, even though that's a benefit for the economy. Because why? Even though they're not creating something positive for the market, they will still earn wages and they get to spend that. So that's basically the idea of that child who's digging a hole. So you can now remember it, Kate, it's much better. Okay, any questions, any comments? Okay. Alright, now comes our last point, which probably take a bit longer. I'm not sure if you can read it in the back.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So that's the idea of free trade versus protectionism. So you have multiple debate topics on the area, like this house, this house would prevent subsidies, this house supports tariffs in the developing countries, in blah 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 industries, and whatsoever. So you have multiple topics about that. Even there was a topic in Euros this year. Does anyone remember? There is a round second euro.
The Impose WTO?
Yeah, WTO should not.
Should impose, I guess, should allow developing countries to impose protectionist tariffs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, this house believes that WTO, which is World Trade Organization, should allow developing countries to impose their own tariffs and subsidies. So that was a very interesting motion. So even though like it's euros and it came this motion, similar motions always come in other terms. So you would probably come to that topic a lot. So what does free trade mean? Why is it good?
No restrictions, no rules.
No restrictions, good, freedom, everyone does what they want, right? So, but let's look at what the economists really say about it. Economists, so one of them is Ricardo, who is very famous because he suggested that if everyone does what they're best at, then everyone will be better off. So according to Ricardo, if you're France and if you are producing really good wine, and if you are the country that can produce that wine to in the cheapest cost, then you should continue doing that. And another country, like Germany, you should keep producing cars if that's your specialty and that's your thing and you can do it very well. So if every country has their specialty and if everyone trades with each other, then they would have a better thing. Why? Even though, for example, as a France, you're best at wine and you're also not so bad at the car, right? But Germany is better than you at the car. So the thing is, for all the labor you would allocate to cars, now you can allocate to wine, assuming obviously they are, changeable, because we make a lot of assumptions in economics. So the thing is, for the time and for the amount of money you could have spent all these resources to produce cars, you could have actually created even much better wines in much higher amount of wines. So even though you are not so bad, you still should allocate those resources there. So let's look at another example. Maybe that would be better. Let's assume you are a lawyer and you are a really good lawyer. You're the best in the town. And also let's assume you have a secretary that types letters for you. And normally you are better than your secretary in terms of typing letters. You're faster. But still, you should let your secretary type your letters. Why? Because for the amount of time you're typing your letters, you're losing the time you would be using for lawyering, which is obviously more beneficial for you because you're obviously much better at it, right? So that's the idea. You should make that trade-off because if you keep doing what you are best at, then you would get much higher revenues. That's basically the idea. All right? So according to Ricardo, if everyone does that, then we would have the most optimum trade, meaning everyone would produce what they're best at and we would buy that product for the best price. But what's the problem with that idea?
Cannot have the common criteria for cars and wines. I mean, cars are obviously harder to do.
Exactly. Cars are harder to do. You need probably much more know-how.
Wine needs more time to breathe. Like
Yes.
that. So you can't have the common ground in order to do a trade-off.
That's true. Also, cars are more expensive, right? So if you're a country who relies on producing cars, like Germany, you're probably in a really good shape because cars bring so much money to your country. Whereas the country, imagine you're producing coffee. Even though coffee is good, it's still not that valuable. And when you have a trade, one side only sells you a car, and the other side only sells you coffee. In the country where they sell cars, you're better off. But in the country where you sell coffee, you have a deficit. Because you have to pay much more compared to what you get. So that, for example, explains why some countries have deficits, why some countries cannot compete with other countries. And because of that, you need sometimes certain subsidies and tariffs, right? Because as a country where I don't have that many industries, I need to, for example, make a choice, choose an industry, and give subsidies and tariffs so that I make sure this industry develops, so that they can compete with the other ones. Look at, for example, South Korea. Before, they didn't have much, but then they created this economy where they give subsidies and tariffs to the industries where there is like computer or certain kind of know-how, IT, and they created one of the biggest brands. Does anyone know the brand? Exactly.
Hyundai. Cars.
Samsung Japanese is Samsung.
Samsung, yeah. So, but Japan is also, I mean, you can also claim that too, that's how they reach that too. Or in China, you could claim a couple of industries were developed thanks to that, right? So how can you compete if you're a country who don't have anything and you only have products that's not super expensive? So you only rely on agriculture or certain kind of things that's not necessarily super expensive. Then maybe you need to create tariffs and subsidies in your own economy so that that economy gets better, so that you can compete against other countries, and then you can remove the subsidies and tariffs, right? So one point about subsidies and tariffs, they don't have to be forever. You can only have them until your sector is competitive enough. Okay. What else? Why protectionism with subsidies on tariffs could be good? For example, sometimes you don't let other people sell in your country, right? So if you're, let's assume, if you want to create your industry in United States, for example, they don't let, they produce poultry, chicken themselves, and they don't let other people sell to the United States market. Why? They want to support their, it's not a farmer, but
Home producer?
Yeah, they want to support their home producers. Because a lot of people rely on that for their jobs, right? It's also a big voting base if you provide those subsidies. So that's another idea why subsidies could be given. You want to make sure that your own domestic people have jobs, have money, and they also like what you do with that subsidies. In the sense that they always vote for you and they vote kind of policies and lobby for that. And because of that, for example, Haiti, even though they also have lots of chicken, they also have lots of poultry, and it's probably cheaper, cannot sell them. And when you have that problem, then you ask Haiti, oh Haiti, why are you not developed?
What is the reason for the government to support the industries that are not profitable, as presumably electronics?
Well, the thing is, you still need to eat. And you don't want to rely on the foreign countries for that, right? Sometimes you want to make sure that you have enough resources, enough food, and you can sustain that yourselves. So you always have those producers. If you always rely on other people to sell you certain things, in the times of war, in the times of conflict, you could have problems. For example, look at Russia. Sometimes you can react to certain countries with the, okay, I'm gonna cut down your gas if you react a certain way, right? For example, this could be a political tool if you have certain kind of resources. And also, if you have to rely on certain countries for your chicken or for your rice or for certain thing, this is not necessarily the best thing for you. So that could be one reason why countries do that. And also, I mean, there is no other job, so they've been doing this and they kind of have to keep doing it, right? Because otherwise these people will revolt against the government and vote for the opposition. So there's also this political incentive to keep people happy. That's another reason EU, why we give farming subsidies many EU countries, even though they are not necessarily the most efficient, right? We want to keep them EU, we want to keep them satisfied, we want to make sure that they keep producing. There are many layers of this, many reasons of this, why we do that.
To provide everybody with food? To provide everybody with food?
Yes, exactly. But when we do that, sometimes the price of the food gets more expensive, right? Because you subsidize this, it doesn't necessarily mean that you produce at the most optimum level. So on the other side, you could claim, your consumers suffer from the tariffs and subsidies. And that's the debate. On one side, you have the subsidies, you love the subsidies, you want to create an industry, you want to make sure you can compete, you can create jobs. But on the other side, people, or average citizens, have to pay more for the products. And where you can compare in contrast, which one is more important in the debate? The consumers or the producers? Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. There could be another reason why we are having protectionism. Imagine you go to a country where labor is very cheap. So it could be somewhere in East Asia, very affordable labor, but you still have to subsidize. Does anyone know why this could be? Like the labor is cheap, but they still need subsidies in order to be able to compete in the international level.
We need to raise the standards of life for these people who are doing a cheap labor.
They need to transfer these goods from one country to another.
No. The reason is, even though the labor is cheap, doesn't mean they are capable. So even though you, example, have a factory, you still need a person who will be taking care of this production line. You need a foreman, you need to educate them. And when you have cheap labor, that's signaling already in the economy, in the market, saying that these labor is not the most educated labor because they don't have the negotiation power. They are easily replaceable. But that also means they don't have the maybe necessary talents to make sure that they can run that factory. Right? So what you need to educate them, you need to train them. And sometimes they're gonna not stay there and they're gonna quit and then you need to replace them. And maybe among 10 people, only one of them will be able to, run the production line in the way that you want. And because of that, even though the labor is seemingly so cheap, there could be so many problems in behind the doors because of the lack of know-how and lack of training and lack of experience. And you need to make up for that. And that's why you would need, for example, subsidies, because even though the individual labor is cheap, your overall cost is still higher. So that could be another argument you could claim why developing countries would need tariffs and subsidies, and they need to set that. Okay, but then let's go to the other side. I like to keep it ping pong so that you are more confused now, but more like a brain gymnastic. So, if there's a subsidy in my country, I know government is going to pay me that amount of money no matter what. I produce which quality, doesn't matter. Like I am producing computers, for example, and I know it's not the best computers, but government has a subsidy because they want to develop the computer industry and they're going to buy my computers no matter what. Do I have any incentives to get better?
No.
No. Do I have any incentives to make sure that the process is the most cost efficient? No, because I'm making my money. So that could be what?
Accountable.
Very good! Moral hazard, exactly. So we made a full circle. Woo! Exactly. So that's moral hazard. So when you learn certain kind of, ideas, like moral hazard, information asymmetry, game theory, whatsoever. So those are ideas that are not necessarily you can use in a specific debate, but all you generally apply if there are certain kind of actors and they have certain kind of incentives, and you want to say that they will act in this way or that way. You could always use those terms or logics. So these are not just ideas for you to make arguments, but it's also ideas for you to shape your thinking and how you can find arguments in certain debates. Yeah? So when you, even if it's not an economics motion, you can still apply these logics. So you can still apply moral hazard. It's a societal debate, job interviews, something else, but you can still apply it, right? So that's the beauty of these economical ideas and the concepts, because they can be applied in multiple places. So that's basically it. Do you have any other questions? Yes.
So I understood the overall concept of information. But I was wondering, when you said the market has to intervene with the lemon and the peaches, how do they intervene?
Well, how do they intervene? For example, you will want to make sure that there is enough information for these cars. For example, you need to have certain certificates if the second-hand car show that how many miles that car traveled, because that's an indication how much the engine or how well the engine is going to work out. Or you want to have certain kind of test, a mechanic, a second opinion come there and check the cars and confirm the price like that. So you can have certain policies as the government or as the market, and make sure that only then individuals make the transaction. That could be an example.
Can you give the same example as, for example, pregnant women?
For which one?
For pregnant women, because we recently had a very good motion on that part. It runs as following. This House believes that women can use their they can defer their pregnancy right as a part of the negotiating contract. Meaning during their negotiation, they can offer for the employer if they will not have this person.
Exactly, perfect motion.
So does that kind of like describes the information asymmetry?
Yes. It's perfect because then you, as an individual, you step into the market and say, look, these are my terms, and you negotiate with the employers, and assuming they trust each other, yes, this makes you better off.
Like, it's really hard to kind of debate this motion because you still have the problem of people not employing women for...
Yeah, but you can always characterize in a way that, okay, people who are openly sexist, people will never hire women because they think women are emotional and they are run by their hormones. They are not part of this debate, right? You can put those people aside. So people who are part of this debate are people who will be swayed, who have little bit biases, who would be swayed by this. So they are much more likely to hire women if they can make sure they wouldn't get pregnant in the most crucial part of the project.
So it's all about kind of like debating about a part of the society that's swaying and the part that will never accept women anyways.
Yes, exactly.
But then it's still like we had a very strong discussion on that part, and they debated that probably it would be better off to introduce other policies.
Like which one?
For example, create more kindergartens. I was in the prop, so I still have more feelings toward having a negotiating rights. But they also say that, for example, we can raise and make mandatory paternity leave for all the guys.
All right, but you only have to ask this question: is it mutually exclusive? That's it. If you have enough political capital to create all these kindergartens on the side of opposition, you should also have enough political capital to create those kindergartens inside of proposition, right? It's not mutually exclusive. And it generally targets women who already have children. So this is also not necessarily part of the debate, right? Because if you are creating more kindergarten, that could also generally more impact women who already have kids or who are already pregnant or who already make this decision. But this contract negotiation is about the future, so much more about the people who are actually in the beginning of their career maybe, and making a promises in order to gain more. So I think you can, like a lot of the debates are always, I generally say that about characterization, how you characterize the debate and how you characterize the actors and their incentives. So that's probably a very good idea in the prop as a PM to make sure that, look, these are the people we are talking about who have profit incentives, who are not openly sexist, who have maybe a little bit unconscious biases about not to hire women because they expect that they are going to drop out in the middle of the project. Those people we are changing. And then you think. Any other question? Yes.
Well, as far as I understood, so the government intervention is like always beneficial, and what information asymmetry concerns. So what are the downsides of the government rectifying this information asymmetry? What is possible?
Okay, so normally if there is an information asymmetry, then we generally say government should intervene. And I don't have an example that could backfire like that. But you can say in the markets where it's functioning already, government should not intervene because there is no such a problem. For example, in the markets where you say there is no problem in the sense that this thing. Imagine the job market. So do governments do they really need to intervene in the job market? Not necessarily in the sense if you believe the market is functioning well. So you could claim that, look, this market is functioning well because everyone is maximizing their own interests. I want to hire the best candidate, and as an employee, I want to work in the highest paycheck. So that's why they generally meet each other. So there is no problem there. So you could claim that, maybe. All right, does it make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other question?
Me?
Yes.
Another one. And how do you debate promotions on public goods?
Public goods. For example?
For example, well, this like grazer's dilemma. Like there's a meadow where everyone where shepherds let their sheep out and they eat all the grass and well they just destroy this meadow. This is public good that everyone uses, but no one gives up using it because everyone else, if you stop doing that, someone else will come and do that instead of you. So how do you explain why people do not always get everything out of these resources?
Well, you can explain it the same logic with the fish example, and you can say that, okay, that's the reason, for example, we have certain areas where you can hunt, in other areas where it's banned to hunt. There are areas in the ocean, it's free, you can go, but there are also areas where it's restricted fishing. So that's basically the idea why governments need to intervene and ban some places that you can't fish as much as you want. Or sometimes there are month limitations, so you can only hunt in that area from, I don't know, September to December, and then the rest you can't, because you let animals copulate. Yeah.
Restore the population.
Yeah, restore the population, exactly. So you could claim that. But for public goods, another point of view, another perspective could be, think about the electricity on the street. Like we all benefit from it, but none of us actually pay for it. Because we don't want to. Why should I pay for it? Right? Because you all use it, why am I supposed to pay for it? Right? So in order to prevent that, government forces everyone to pay taxes so that they can finance this. So that's to prevent, again, the idea of, basically, if you let everyone maximize their own wishes, as if the game theory, then no one would pay. But if you force everyone, then you have electricity. Inequality, yes.
So for in a debate, when they talk about protecting dying industries, what is a good opposition for not adopting? I know, in general, we say protectionism is bad because of overall good on society. But when the state, for example, the United States, has a duty to their car industries in Detroit and whatnot, how do you oppose those types of arguments?
I think first you need to show how they wouldn't be the most effective one. So you show how if they don't have a profit incentive or fear that they need to be profit incentive, then how they would react. So they wouldn't necessarily find the best labor, they wouldn't pay the best wages, and they wouldn't minimize their costs. So they wouldn't have the most efficient way of producing these things. And you could also say, if you are not feared that another another company could take away your consumers. So if I'm not afraid, as BMW, that Volkswagen can come and steal my consumer, then I have no reason to innovate, no reason to make it better. So I always stay in a stagnant way. That's another reason why it gets better. And third reason could be, because of this, it always gets more expensive, so your consumers always have to pay much more for this. And you don't have the optimum sale transactions in the market of that. So this could also mean that less revenues for the company, hence less ability to be able to invest that within their own R&D. So something like that. Yes?
Can we explain, it's always the argument that innovations are brought by the competition because you're afraid that somebody will overcome it.
Exactly.
But is there any, I suppose there is an explanation that why innovations can be brought in life without the fear of competition,
yes.
Just because you want to become better. But it feels it's weaker, than the basic competition stuff.
I mean, you can talk about those industries where they are so fragile and you need a long R&D period. For example, pharmaceuticals. You do have incentives to create better drugs, You generally employ people, researchers, doctors there, who generally have those incentives, altruistic incentives to actually create something and change something. But it's so risky and it takes such a long time, you actually need that protection in order to survive in the market. And if you always care about the profits, you could claim, you don't necessarily invest in the long-term projects that could end up beneficial or not, right? So sometimes you need a good investor or good safety net. Think about, for example, Elon Musk. If Elon Musk didn't own his own company and didn't have that much money and wasn't that crazy, no one would invest in a space travel, commercial space travel or whatsoever. But since he has that safety net by himself, he gets to invest in those crazy areas and maybe make the space exploration, which is a very crazy idea, maybe we real in 20 years, that makes it more affordable and more reachable, makes it short term. Even the people who are not necessarily super rich could maybe one day could travel around space. So that could be another reason why you need either subsidies or certain kind of safety net or certain kind of motivations for people or abilities or resources. Okay?
Yeah.
Any other question? All right, then it's my pleasure to let you go. Thank you very much.